Welcome, and thank you for joining the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Holocaust Center's Chief Operating Officer. At a time when the word polarized seems to be one of the most frequently used words, I think you will find today's speaker will provide us with a little hope on how this trend might be reversed. I know we have people joining us from all over today, and we'd love to hear where you are joining from. Please feel free to let us know in the chat. And if you are part of the 6th grade class at the French American School of Puget Sound, welcome, and we are so glad you are here. Every other year, our Holocaust Center offers an opportunity for people to travel and learn about the Holocaust in the places where it occurred. In July, we will be offering another such trip, this time to Vienna and Poland. These trips are about the meaning of memory and connecting to history, to people, and understanding that each of us has the power to make a difference. The trip this year is going to be remarkable, and we have some very special opportunities already planned, including a visit to sites off the beaten path. You can find all the details on our website. The trip is open to anyone 18 and older, and a limited number of scholarships are available for teachers in Washington State. If you have ever considered taking a trip like this, this is the one to take. Our tours focus on people, on their stories and their choices, and the ability and willingness of some to act as upstanders, people who took a risk to help others. These are our true role models, and this is what we mean by humanity. Seeing other people as real people, as complicated and nuanced as we see ourselves. The teenagers we are going to hear about today are role models for all of us, young people willing to step out of their comfort zones and reach across the divide even when it's uncomfortable. We are so fortunate to have with us today Hannah Hochkeppel. With more than 10 years of experience in a variety of education and program development spaces, Hannah is deeply invested in the work of youth empowerment, advocacy, and peace building. Most important to her is centering youth voices and youth leadership as an integral piece of this work. As a nonprofit and education professional, she has a passion for interfaith partnership, supporting social justice movements, and developing strategy for conflict resolution and peace building around the world. In addition to her nonprofit work, she has also previously worked in the fields of mental health counseling and religious education. She holds a BS in psychology from Virginia Tech, an MA in religion and theology from Seattle University. Most recently, Hannah has served as the Global Programs Director for Kids for Peace International and the United States Country Director for Seeds for Peace. Her work has focused specifically on creating interfaith and intercultural peace-building programs for K-12 students. She has worked with youth in the United States and with youth globally in Western Europe, South Asia, and the Middle East, and with a special focus on Israel and Palestine. Hannah, I can only hope that a little bit of all of your work rubs off on all of us. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will have time to take questions from the audience at the end of the program, and please put your questions in the Q&A at any time. Welcome, Hannah.
Great. Thanks so much, Alana, and welcome all of you. It's so good to be here. I was telling Alana before you all jumped on that it's been a while since I have had the chance to do a webinar, a panel, a conversation like this. And in the midst of a lot of hard things in our world, it gives me hope to think about the stories that I want to share with you and the hard things that I want to share with you. Even amidst those things, I think there are glimmers of hope and resilience in our world. And so I hope that some of that comes across in what I share with you today. Like Alana said, my name is Hannah. I live in Kirkland, Washington, so just outside of Seattle. I grew up in the Southeast area of the United States in Virginia and South Carolina. And so have sort of been all over and have been at this work now for close to 10 years. And I never cease to learn things I never cease to learn things from the roles and responsibilities that I have, but more importantly, never cease to learn things from the young people who come across our programs and who come across sort of my life. Many of whom I'm in relationship with for many years as they grow up and as they become adults in our world, as they take on leadership, from the very beginning as young people and on into finding their place in the fabric of our world and of our societies. I'm going to focus today on stories about youth, both in global settings, specifically in Israel and Palestine and Jerusalem, and also some stories from youth here in the United States. These are all youth who know each other, who have interacted globally, and have found their way to resilience, to relationship across oceans, across state boundaries, whatever it is that sort of geographically is dividing them, and also across the myriad of other sort of identities that they hold, each of them complex individuals. And so I hope that as I share some of these stories in the beginning, it sparks imagining for you. It sparks some creativity, some thought, maybe even some challenge as to how we lean into and live into relationship with one another, and the role that relationship plays in the ways in which we navigate the things that are hard, that are scary, that are challenging in our world across time. So I want to share just a moment about Kids for Peace specifically as an organization, and then show you a short video that gives you imagery, faces, names, voices of people who that movement and that work has touched, that will spark our conversation. Kids for Peace started in 2002, right in the midst of the Second Intifada in Israel and Palestine. There were 12 families, 12 young people, 4 Jewish, 4 Muslim, 4 Christian, who came together and began conversation. For many of them, this was some of the first relationships they had with the other, right? With people from the other side. First relationship with Palestinians as Israelis and with Israelis as Palestinians. And as they built this relationship, they realized that rather than beginning as adults, what would it mean for us to find a way to support our young people, our children, to come together and to get to know one another, not setting aside the things that divide us, not setting aside the conflicts that we have, but really to come together in relationship and find ways to simultaneously find common ground, right? As the phrase goes, or what I like to say is find the things that we enjoy together and find the things that are unique about our life experiences and uplift them in ways that build understanding, build empathy together. So this is the work of Kids for Peace. And the short video that I want to show you here to kick us off was made 20 years after that moment. So just a few years ago, on the 20th anniversary of Kids for Peace. Those first 12-year-olds, those first young people who started in 2002 were well into adulthood at that point, into their 30s. Yet this had continued. It had moved forward. It had continued happening across many years. It gives a snapshot of the voices, the faces, the imagery of people gathering. You'll see these pictures. You'll even hear singing from youth who wrote a song together, teaching their friends about Ramadan. You'll hear that sort of in the background. So I invite you to watch this, to engage with this video, see what you notice, see what you hear, and then we'll be back to tell a few stories as we then engage in some conversation.
Now I feel old filming this, as I just realized it's been 16 years since I was at camp.
It's something that I wrote down in my journal when I was 12, right after my first Kids for Peace camp, actually. I wrote down, "We all live under the same sun."
Hello, my name is Qais Shaban. I'm a 17-year-old Muslim and I live in Jerusalem.
And one thing I remember is that I felt valued being a part of a group.
Kids for Peace has encouraged me to have an open mind and listen to different perspectives and take them into consideration,
which probably shaped my personality and helped me gain more confidence, which is very important for every kid.
I had just come out of living for 2 weeks with kids from all over the world, kids from all different faith traditions, from all different backgrounds, and I was overwhelmed by our similarities.
And I feel that Kids for Peace does this very nicely, is that they make every camper or participant feel special in their own ways, and that's something I will forever cherish.
Every year at the end of the Kids for Peace summer camp, the youth would put on a show and invite their families and community members. This was my favorite moment each summer because I got to witness the adults attending the show. I got to see them understand the complexities of the conflict and gain empathy for all sides.
They don't eat and they don't drink. They fast until the dark of night. During Ramadan, Ramadan, this family celebrates Ramadan.
Kids for Peace's 10th anniversary, we decided to put on kind of this big reunion party celebration for Kids for Peace. It was the first time we had gone to do something beyond kind of each group its own program and really invite the whole community together. We had no idea what we were doing. We set up the event to be at the Ambassador Hotel in East Jerusalem. We sent out invitations and phone calls to all the participants and their families that we could find their contact details to. And we had 5 RSVPs for the event. And we were really worried in Jerusalem, all of the staff, what was going to happen, who would be there. Maybe no one would show up. Maybe Kids for Peace wasn't significant for others as it was for us. And the day of the event, we were even more nervous. We spent, all this money and invested our time into creating this event that was going to bring together singing and speeches. And we walked into the Ambassador Hotel and we found 250 youth and their families together, and that was the moment we realized that this was the beginning of the movement.
My experience in Kids for Peace has taught me how to be an effective activist, which is to say, always pursuing solutions that address the root cause, even if the solution isn't glamorous.
My Kids for Peace experience has helped me not only to speak out, but also to be more aware of the world around me and bridge divides I never even realized were there.
Before, I wouldn't have been able to speak in front of an audience, and I've been able to grow in that ability through Kids for Peace, which I think has made me a stronger leader.
Whether they succeed, whether they fail, they know what it's like to take action together with people from different sides of the conflict, and it gives the youth a sense that I can make change, I can work with anybody, and that's what's needed to create real peace.
I think it's important that adults and youth understand the power of a youth-driven movement. Our youth at Kids for Peace have a unique combination of characteristics of hope and grit. And it's essential that they are part of any peace building.
Because of Kids for Peace, I've learned to listen to others.
Because of Kids for Peace, I have real friendships with Palestinians and Israelis and our U.S. counterparts.
Because of Kids for Peace, I believe in interpersonal relationships and the values they can bring, and also the positive impact I can make in my community.
Because of Kids for Peace, I have been able to make new friends from different backgrounds.
Because of Kids for Peace, I've become better at standing up for others and myself.
Because of Kids for Peace, I want to change the world for the better.
I've dedicated my life to peacemaking, and it's because of the experience of Kids for Peace that I continue to do this work.
Right now, I'm hoping that together we can create lasting change and take down the systems of oppression that have been up for far too long. In the future, I hope that we can finally achieve equity and peace and truly have justice for all.
All right. So I hope that you saw in there smiling faces, serious faces, heard the voices of young people across years, either reflecting back on their time as a 12, 13, 14-year-old in the program, or talking even in that moment about who it is that this was making them. What was this experience of encountering others, of building relationships, doing in their lives? We often in Kids for Peace have talked about, you hear like a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim, and a Sikh and a Buddhist are sitting together. And often that's the beginning of a joke, right? It's the beginning of sort of creating punchlines based on sort of comparison and change. But the beauty of a community like this, a beauty of the various communities that I have worked with, is that there's no punchline. There's merely desire to know, to understand, to build relationship, to find ways to authentically share who you are, who your experiences are, and also listen with respect and empathy to really understand others' place in the world. All of this is beautiful and wonderful, right? There's sunshine, there's rainbows, there's smiles, there's soccer, and all the things you see in this video and in these stories. But there's a cycle that happens in this work of peace building, and it doesn't always last. There's always something often coming. There's something that happens. And so I want to tell you just a couple of stories here as we move into the middle of our time together, and then we'll move into some conversation. But all of this is beautiful, and then war happens, violence happens, misunderstanding happens. I remember back in the summer of 2014, which was my first summer doing this work. That was the summer of the Gaza war back in 2014. And we were not sure up until about 24 hours before the plane took off if the youth who were coming from Israel and Palestine were even going to be able to come to a program together that summer. It was not necessarily going to be possible. And so there were phones, there were emails, there were all of these things, but we did it, and people came together. But they came together extremely raw, extremely vulnerable, extremely angry in many cases. Even at 12 and 13 years old, they knew something is happening. This is the thing that is happening. And I want desperately to talk about it, but do I trust these people enough to talk about it with them? And that was often the question that we heard. And so over multiple weeks, we didn't start by talking about current events. We started by tie-dyeing t-shirts. We started by sharing meals. We started by, offering the ways in which we celebrate in our houses, in our traditions. We played soccer together. And as the time went on, we slowly built these relationships that created a space where people could slowly but surely step into their vulnerability, step into their stories, open up their pain, their anger, their frustration, but also their questions. They're wondering, how is it that we don't repeat this cycle? And so through those relationships, we managed to get to the root of many of these conversations. And that's one of the things I want to leave you with today, is this idea that through relationship, we open ourselves up to vulnerability. We open ourselves up to a willingness and a way of trusting enough to share. And yet the cycle continued. Many of these youth who were together in 2014, who had done this work, gathered again in the summer of 2015. This time they were all in Washington, D.C. together. And it happened that the week that they were together, there was a huge spike in violence in Jerusalem. And there was a string of stabbings that happened in Jerusalem, and a string of violence that happened in Jerusalem. And for a few of our youth who were present, this directly impacted them. They had family, they had friends who were injured or who were scared, who were living in the neighborhoods on the streets where these things were taking place. And for all of them, it was raw because it was their communities, it was their home that this was happening in. And I remember very distinctly sitting in a room with these now 14-year-olds screaming at one another, crying, unable to muster the language even needed to be able to share and to understand. And all of that was hard, right? We have to hold and create this space for all of that feeling, all of that emotion. But the thing I remember most distinctly is that even after the yelling, the crying, the anger, and the fear, the slamming of doors as they left the room, they all came back. And that was the thing that even years later, some of these youth would talk about. And they would say, do you remember that time where we were screaming at each other and we all just walked out of the room? You know, and yes, I do remember, I was there. I do remember this happening. I was like, but I remember something different. And they're like, what do you remember? And I was like, I remember that you came back. And for these young people who now were even a few years older, who were 16 and 17 years old at this point, they sat and pondered that for a minute. And they were like, we did come back because we knew that even though we were angry, there was relationship in this space that we could lean into, that we could trust, that we could try to move forward. We didn't solve anything in any of those conversations, but at the same time, their approach was different. And it was grounded in that authenticity, that vulnerability that was present. I have one more story to share with you, and then would love to dive into some conversation with Alana. But I want to tell you briefly about Shali and Abed. Shali is Israeli. Abed is Palestinian. They have been friends since they were 12 years old. They met in Kids for Peace. They are now 20. I want to say 20 or 21. And so they have been building this friendship for years and years. Both of them went to schools where they were going to schools with both Israeli and Palestinian students. So they had this very unique experience in their school communities. And they had this experience of coming together in Kids for Peace. Both of them are trilingual. They speak Arabic and Hebrew and English fluently. And they built this friendship over time in Kids for Peace. When they got to high school, they slowly began to introduce each other to their friend groups. So Abed would bring Shali along. Shali would bring Abed along. And that was hard. They reflected on their friends were not as welcoming as they were. And these were friends who were not part of Kids for Peace, had not had these experiences, and were scared. They were nervous. This was unusual. But the thing I remember most about Shali and Abed, and they still talk about this to this day, they knew, even at 12, that one day Shali would join the army and Abed would go to college. And this was roundabout when they turned 18. And they, all through their friendship, were aware that this was going to happen. And I was on a webinar very similar to this with them when they were 17. And someone asked them this question. They said, what are you going to do next year when Shali goes to the army and Abed goes to college? And neither of them spoke for a few minutes. And they sat there and they sort of like had this moment where suddenly it was time. It was time to talk about it. It was time to figure this out. And they each looked at each other and they said, I'm not going to change my life path because of this. This is what's next for me. But I hope that as I move forward in my life, I bring the empathy, I bring the understanding, I bring this relationship that has meant so much to me into the ways that I interact with others and into the ways that I speak to others and treat others. It's not changing what I'm doing with my life. It's not changing the next step of my life, but it is changing the way I show up there and the way that I interact there. And so the two of them are still friends to this day. They still talk and are have had to grapple with these different realities of their life. And that's hard, but it's grounded in this very authentic relationship where they can say the things that they disagree with each other, and that's okay. And they want to know. So that brings me to this moment, this day, this moment of war we find ourselves in that has erupted. When you've done this work long enough, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, you've seen this cycle too many times. It's moments of fear and frustration and sadness. And yet it also offers moments of trying to find the grit, the resilience. And sometimes that wavers. It's hard to locate. And the thing that I have been grounding my hope in is that all of these young people I've talked about, all of these young people you've seen in this video, are speaking out. They are using those voices that they have found to talk about and to advocate for and to share their deep, deep anger and sadness and frustration. And they're sharing and saying things that they know their friends are not going to agree with, that they know sometimes will even be hurtful to their friends. But yet in that same cycle of sharing, they're also reaching out to one another. They're checking on each other. They understand how to exist in a world where you can vehemently disagree, vehemently be opposed, and yet also find ways to uphold the humanity of one another, and to seek change, seek something different that doesn't necessarily start even with agreement, but starts with an acknowledgement that even amidst the pain and the violence, you can find visceral connection with people that brings that relationship to life, that grounds us in a place to start. So I hope this has been helpful, has given you some hope, some reality of how these young people interact. And Alana, I'd love to chat with you for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for those really powerful stories. And, I wish we could have these individuals here now to ask them even like, how are they dealing with this yet again? Because as you said, it's like this cycle continues, like every few years, if not more often, we sort of find ourselves here in one way or another. So I wonder, just to kind of back up a little bit, can you tell us, how did you get started in this kind of work?
Completely by accident, which I think is how many people find themselves here. So when I was working on my master's at Seattle University, I got connected to Kids for Peace. And it was supposed to be a one moment thing. They needed, personally am Christian, and they needed a Christian faith advisor for a program they were doing here in Seattle. And I thought, that feels like a great way to spend 2 weeks with young people. I like kids. This will be great. 10 years later, here we are. And the thing that I have always said is that you can often find and seek and work towards your dream job. And just as often you stumble upon it by accident and realize this is exactly the thing that you want to be doing. And I love this intersection of learning alongside and working to support young people, along with bringing to life these ideas of faith, of justice, of solidarity. And so I stumbled into it and it stuck. So I'm excited to still be here.
You are the perfect person for this. I mean, we are all lucky that you stumbled into this. So Hannah, in all your years, more than 10 now, of working with these teens and youth, what has surprised you about working with them?
I started out professionally working with much younger youth. I worked with children, right? Elementary aged children primarily. And I was like, middle schoolers, high schoolers, they're fine. Like, this is good. But as I got into this work and I started working with these teens, I realized something that I now like shout from the rooftops to everyone that will listen to me. There is something so special about that moment in life where you understand how to critically think about the world, and your entire approach to that comes from a place of question and curiosity. When in all of the years that I have been doing this work with teens, I have rarely encountered teens who are not willing to lead with a question, not willing to say, that is unfamiliar to me. They don't feel like they need to know and understand it all, but yet are willing to say, I don't know any of that, so tell me about it. I'm going to still decide what I think about it, but I want more information first. So it's not a blank slate, but it's a much more creative and sort of willing space to sit in with young people. And just the amount of things that I have learned just from listening into those conversations of curiosity and of grappling really are such a gift to me in this work, and something that I hope others will find a way to encounter.
Do you think that that's something that kids learn? Like they learn how to ask those questions and how to approach things, as you said, with a spirit of curiosity, even if they're making their own opinions and forming their own judgments along the way. It's like they're open to getting more information to help inform their decisions.
Absolutely. And I think and for us, it's something that we're not necessarily teaching the skill, we're honing the muscle. If you think back to, so I want everybody to think about their favorite 4-year-old. A 4-year-old's favorite question is why, right? But why? But why? On and on and on we go, right? It's like innately a part of us when we're small to say, but why? Like, I want to know why. And I think that over time, whether this is society, whether this is just human nature, I don't know, but over time we lose that sort of like innate why question. It sort of fades from us. We just are like, oh, that's how it is. You know, this is what the world does, or we just sort of accept the things. And I think one of the things I love about working with teens is that it's not so much teaching the skill, but it's like sort of pulling and tugging to remember, oh, like, no, I just want to keep asking why, because I want to understand, I want to know. And so for me, it's very much, I talk about it with young people this way. I'm like, you're building a muscle that is going to last your entire life. When you learn and you practice leading with curiosity, leading with question, and not assuming that you fully understand what's in front of you, because you're only getting the tiniest slice of it until you start to dig deeper.
That's such a good life lesson for all of us. So Hannah, when you're trying to find youth and teens for these programs, how do you find them and how willing are people to participate?
At this point, Often the teens that we find are through relationship. It all comes back to relationships. Are through word of mouth, are through whether they're younger siblings, their friends. We have relationships with their school, with some other community, with their house of worship, like whatever those communities are. But slowly rippling sort of the size of the group and the people that we interact with happen through those ripples and through those relationships. And we typically get a few different types of youth. We occasionally get young people who are like self-motivated and self-driven and have declared to their family, their parents, whoever, I am going to go and participate in this thing. And here they come. On the other end of the spectrum, we get parents who say, my child will be participating in this thing. That mostly works. Sometimes it doesn't. But usually that's just because the youth is not ready yet, or they don't understand what their parent has offered them. And then we also get youth who are in a mixed situation. Sometimes they're in a situation where this is especially true with youth, our youth who live in Jerusalem, who live in Israel, who live in Palestine. Their immediate family is often so supportive of their participation in this. But even their extended family, and especially friends or schoolmates or others, are not necessarily as supportive. It feels scary to them. It feels unknown. And so we definitely have young people in our program, even here in the United States. This is not just specific to the Middle East, but who have to sort of find a way to navigate discord, even within their loved ones, right? Within their sort of set, solid community, when there are people who don't agree with the ideas of sort of coming into relationship, coming into dialogue, coming into curiosity, where there's a lot of sort of bias and assumption that's baked into the narratives and the stories. And so I have seen youth who have dealt with this the whole time they've been involved, and obviously still now into adulthood. And I've also seen youth who have often been the quiet sort of movement within their communities, within their families, to say, like, we can do this differently, and let's keep talking about that and keep talking about that. And so it's a little bit of everything, but that's how we find people.
So when Palestinian and Jewish kids meet each other, what do you think surprises them most about the other?
They often we often start with music. That's often that's really easy for young people to talk about. And they realize, oh, we all know the same songs. We all know the same dances. We all know the same sort of pop culture. And which is a very sort of fun place to start, right? When you throw on a song that everybody in the room starts jumping up and down and singing to, there's like camaraderie built in that, where everybody looks around and they say, oh, everybody knows this. And that sort of leans then into, but let me teach you this that you don't know, and vice versa. So I think one of the things that often surprises people most is how much of that sort of shared culture, and not necessarily the culture of their religion or their tradition or their nationality or any of that sort of thing, but these shared sort of global culture pieces, right, of music, of song, books, literature, movies, like all of these things that people do tend to share these days, especially in 2023, right, with social media and internet and all of that. And so often that's where I see youth start, and I see it sort of surprise them to say, oh, it's a light bulb that you sort of see come on. And from there, you can communicate most things with music and song. And so they typically find their way forward from there.
That's awesome. Because you've been doing this, and you mentioned this, that you've seen these cycles of violence kind of increase and decrease over the years. And I wonder, even with these cycles, how have the relationships between the teens changed over the years, and how has your work with the teens changed over the years as we've had COVID and just more social media than ever before? I mean, just the world itself is changing. So I wonder how that also changes the relationships.
Totally. I think that it requires a deeper well of resilience nowadays, because when you are still building relationship, when it is still tenuous, it's still fragile, the shortest of Instagram posts is gonna just completely bust up any sort of relationship that you have built at that point, and it makes it even harder to get it back. And so I think that's one of the things that I have noticed, especially in this moment, in these last few months, that people who have had relationships for years and years are finding their way through. It's scary, it's muddy, it's hard, but they're finding their way forward, and they're desiring a way forward. They're reaching out, they're asking. Like I had a young adult reach out to me a couple weeks ago, and she was like, this other young person unfollowed me on Instagram. This was the text message that I got. And I was like, you are 22 years old. What would you like me to do about that? She was like, no. She's like, if I can get us all together, will you join us and just like hold space for us to have a conversation? I was like, sure, like absolutely, I can do that. But it's, but they have been friends for 8-9 years at this point. And so, and at the same time, there's younger people who have been in these relationships for 2 months, 6 months, 8 months, who are sharing the deep pain of, private messages that are anti-Semitic, that are cruel, that are hateful, and that are all coming from this place of deep fear and deep sadness that everyone is doing. And so while at the same time, the relationship is much more fragile and it's going to be much harder to put back together, every time I get these notes or these messages or these conversations about so-and-so said this to me and I don't know what to do with that, it also always comes with, I know this isn't really who they are, and so I don't understand where it's coming from. And so that's sort of is the thing that I think teens are grappling with here in this moment that's different than ever before, has been this, like, again, deep curiosity to understand, but yet accompanied with this really deep hurt, and lack of trust and fear, that if they try and lean into this relationship again, it's only going to make it worse. And sometimes they're right, and hopefully sometimes they're wrong. But it's sort of the risk that comes with this work, is to know that by leaning into it, not only are you having to be open and curious, but you're also having to be raw. You're having to be vulnerable, and bring some deep stuff of your own to the table, in order to find a way forward.
So kind of building on that, I wonder, considering the war that's going on now, are you still in touch with any of the Israeli or Palestinian youth? And what are you hearing from them now?
Yeah, I am. And I'll be very honest, I am when I can find them. Being in the United States and them being in Israel and Palestine, there are sometimes days where people are not responding. I'm not in touch with people, and because there's constantly things happening in their space. And the thing that I have noticed in all of these conversations and the people that I'm in touch with is exhaustion. Everybody's exhausted. This is not the first time in their lives that they have had to deal with these sort of cycles. It is, however, the first time in a long time that things have been this violent, that has been such an extended moment of active violence and fear and tension. And so there's exhaustion all around. And I also am seeing not a giving up, but a sort of crack in the hope that they might have had when they were 14, right? They're young, many of them are now young adults, though we also still have younger 12, 13, 14, and high school students. And there's some cracks in the hope and resilience that we often see from young people in this work. They come into this wanting it to be successful, and it's not successful, right? On a grand scale, right? There is still such conflict, such hatred, such violence that's present in this space, and And that's, trickles across the world, right? It's not just, I mean, it's most present in Israel and Palestine, but it's affecting people, here in Seattle and elsewhere. And so there's these cracks in sort of the hope that I'm seeing that just fill me with grief that this is the experience. And it hasn't been erased completely, right? There's still hope that, like, if one day we did do this well, like, what does it mean to come back to that? And I think that's ultimately the hope that I hold on to, is that I believe strongly, just as in the summer of 2015, when everybody screamed and yelled and left and then came back, that the youth who are part of movements like Kids for Peace and others and are part of these conversations are going to be some of the first back at a table, are going to be some of the first back at a conversation, because ultimately they do care about one another. And so somewhere in there, I think there's hope that they can try and find their way forward, and are going to be able to do that faster than others who have not had that opportunity to live into their humanity together.
Hannah, I want to take a couple questions from people who are watching. And to the people watching, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A at any time. But I want to start with one that's here from Laureen, who asks, are you familiar with the program Hand in Hand that the schools in Israel that are taught by Jewish and Palestinian faculty? The students are also from very different backgrounds.
Yeah, I love Hand in Hand. Shali, who I mentioned earlier, went to a Hand in Hand school, and they're wonderful. And I think if you're on social media at all, Hand in Hand has been throughout these past couple of months, has actually been posting stories and quotes and statements from students, parents, community members in the Hand in Hand world. And it's been such a glimmer for me of hope and of sharing about when you, and for them, they're there every single day, right? Like, we aren't necessarily seeing our kids every single day, but they're at school every day and in these communities every day. And some of the stories that they've posted of the ways in which people have come together and the ways in which that community leans into this choice, right? It's a choice to be in relationship with one another. And so how have they continued to make that choice, even in the midst of all that's been going on?
That's the first time I've heard of that program, so I'm really interested.
Look them up. Look them up. Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. All right, there's another question here, and this person asks, how do you cope with empathy burnout or the inevitable feelings of hopelessness that often accompany this type of work?
I'm going to give you the raw and honest answer, and then the more eloquent answer. I sometimes sit on my couch for an entire day and cry. Like, that's the raw and honest answer. Sometimes it's just what you have to do. You have to just be willing to sit down and be like, this is more than I can do today, in this moment. And this is something that I say regularly to youth, is that we don't exist in bubbles. We don't exist in vacuums. Social movements, social justice work, all of this sort of desire for peace building doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so one of the most important gifts that we can give as people who are part of this work is knowing when we need to sit on our couch and cry for a day and being willing to take a step back. Because we become, we're not helpful, we're not productive in those moments where we are holding all of that within us and just trying to sort of quash it away. And part of doing this work is trusting that somebody else is going to step forward as you step back, and then you're going to step forward again when they need to step back. And there's a give and take in that work. So it's not easy. It's not glamorous. And I think some of the best lessons I have learned have been how to find people that I can be just completely raw and honest with and say, I know that there's a need in this moment and I cannot be the one to fill that. I don't have anything left to give in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your honesty in that. Yeah, thank you. Another question comes from Ron, who asks, in addition to Israel-Palestine, in what other areas of the world are you active?
So in the work that I have done over the past 10 years, I have worked with young people in Jerusalem and Israel and Palestine, in Jordan and Egypt, youth who are from India, Pakistan, Kashmir, youth who are from Afghanistan, youth who are from France, youth who are from the United Kingdom, and then across the United States as well. And so in all of these places, I think, and this is one of the other things that I also like shout from the rooftops when I can. So thank you for this question, because I think we get really caught up in 2023 with the headline of the moment, right? We have this 24-hour news cycle that is like screaming headlines at us about the things going on in the world. But the reality for young people is that they simultaneously care about that. Often they have friends that live in those places and they care about those things. But they're also deeply, deeply aware of the division, the violence, the hatred, the injustice that's present in their own communities, their neighborhood, their school, their city, their country. And so in all of these places, right, we have these youth who are equally globally minded, but also very present locally to what's happening for them. And so there's a lot of universal lessons to be learned, skills or muscles to build. And each of us brings our own unique, complex identity into a unique and complex context. So it's never easy to say, like, this is the thing that I work on, right? And it's not all the geopolitical stuff. It's lots and lots of things that are happening, but it's worth talking about all of it. And young people want to talk about all of it.
So, Hannah, what if adults want to be involved in programs like this? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah. So the first thing that I always tell adults is that one of the best gifts that you can give young people in your community is to do some of your own experience of this work. And so I always tell people, start small, start with one person, start with one experience, find something that makes you just a little bit uncomfortable, not unsafe. We don't want you to feel unsafe, but like find an experience, find a conversation that sort of tugs at you, makes you feel just a little uncomfortable. Pretend you have a pumpkin pie and somebody's cut a triangle directly out of the middle of it. I feel like that makes us all uncomfortable. It's not how you cut pie. And yet we can all deal with a little bit of uncomfortableness in our life. That's not a word, but I use it a lot. So that's step one, is just finding those people, those places, those things. For you, this might be visiting a faith tradition that's not your own and just experiencing what that's like. For others, it's walking down the street to have a conversation with their neighbor who has a sign that they disagree with in their front yard. And it's not even to talk about the sign, but just to begin, hi, you're a person, you live on my street. Who are you? How are you? And then being able to get involved with organizations like Kids for Peace, Seeds of Peace. In Western Washington, there's an organization called Paths to Understanding that does a lot of this work of bringing communities together in King and Skagit and Snohomish County. So looking for those organizations that are already bringing people together and finding ways to offer resource to them, and whatever that may be. Maybe that's your time, maybe it's a skill, maybe it's other things, but finding ways to just get involved and always asking, what do you need? And it's not necessarily always the most glamorous thing, but all of us are nonprofits and all of us need things. And so being able to engage in that way. Because every single one of the organizations I named and so many others are communities that want more and more people to be engaged. And so by engaging in whatever ways you do, big or small, you're finding a community of people who also desire to be part of this type of work.
I love that. So Hannah, one last question for you. Will you tell us what you're working on now and kind of what projects you have in the works?
Yes, absolutely. So I am in a moment of transition in my life, actually, and with a lot of love and grace and care, I'm actually stepping away from my work at Kids for Peace and my work at Seeds of Peace the empathy question comes back to me, I need to step away. I need to step into something new for myself. And so I'm really excited to join the third organization that I named, which is called Paths to Understanding. And they work primarily, exclusively with adult communities in a multi-faith context here in Western Washington. And so I am going to be joining their staff in January to start a youth program for them. So we'll be bringing even more of this sort of connection of youth, especially in the multi-faith context, to Western Washington starting in January.
So fantastic. I can't wait to see and hear more about what you do. They're so lucky to have you. Really, really great. Hannah, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and experience with us today and these incredible stories of youth. They're just, I think they inspire me. I hope they inspired the other people watching. And I feel like they show us that there are new and different ways that we can approach this.
Yeah, always. There's always a way, and it starts with curiosity and learning. So thanks so much for having me, Alana.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you to everybody for joining our program today. This Sunday at 2:00 p.m., I hope you can join us in person at the Holocaust Center to hear the stories of Eric Weiss and Gerda Feldman, two Holocaust survivors who escaped, one who escaped Vienna and the other who survived Bergen-Belsen as a teenager. The two met after the war, and their daughter, Naomi Newman, will be sharing these remarkable stories. You also don't want to miss our Lunch and Learn program next week with Archie Gottesman, the founder of Jubelong. Have you seen those giant pink billboards? You would know it if you have, and I promise you will look at it twice and maybe even 3 times and ask yourself, does that really say what I think it says? And you might find it offensive, or maybe you'll find it a call to action, or maybe proud that it calls out anti-Semitism so boldly. Either way, come and hear Archie talk about Jubelong's mission and their campaign to end anti-Semitism. Our programs at the Holocaust Center are possible because of our generous supporters. Donations of all sizes make a difference. There's a link in the chat, and you know we couldn't do this work without you. Thank you to our entire staff who are all working so hard to carry out the Holocaust Center's work and our mission. Richard Green, our technology director, who helps to run these Lunch and Learn programs and is always working behind the scenes. Dee Simon, our CEO, who expertly steers the ship. And our entire team, Paul Regelbrug, Jessica Michaels, Branda Anderson, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Morgan Romero, Lexi Jason, Amanda Davis, Katie Lawrence, Michael Langberg, Olivia Teague, and Mario Felipe Bemonte. Thank you to all of you, wishing you all safety and security in the week to come, and we hope to see you next week. This concludes our program for today.